Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time. What would you think it's worth telling that generation?
Mind spins in spirals like the card Cogito. I think, therefore, but do I even know? Hume said the sun might not rise in the morning. Patterns ain't proof, just habits we adorn. Russell's teapot floating out in the void. Invisible doubts that can't be destroyed. Belief ain't a bird and the skeptic employs. Question the noise, the cosmos ploys. Skeptic's eyes always peeping the fraud. Truth ain't handed down, it's wrestled from the gods. Doubts my temple, my faith is flawed. Think it through twice before I applaud. Induction wobbles like a table with no leg. Hume's knife cuts leave certainty begging. A billion white swans, but I'm black renegade. Shatter the mirror, the cracks cascade. Cogito feels strong, but is it really? Thoughts build castles, clouds act silly. Russell's pot spins in the ether so freely. Prove it exists or the claim's too dreamy. Am I the dreamer or the dream in the show? The car wrestled devils, still didn't know. Faith and senses, they play tricks on a low. Truth's a mirage in a desert of woe.
When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skeptic Philosophy. Thank you for joining today. Today, we have a guest on that I've been quite anxious to talk to for quite a while. We have Ed from The Rabbit Atheist will be coming on. So without further ado, let me just bring him on stage here. Right. Ed, how's it going, man?
It's going all right.
Fantastic. All right. I have been anxious to talk to you, and I'll tell you why, because they have a lot of these kind of what we call Phil bros that are very philosophy side, and they really get together. And if they're heavy in philosophy, and I've gotten fairly heavy into philosophy myself, but I think I'm more connected to the Christian text. And I've spent a lot of time studying the Christian text and kind of the history of the Christendom. So I really enjoy it. It's a subject that, for whatever reason, it's still a guilty pleasure. I still enjoy talking about it. I enjoy understanding how it really folded out. And there's a lot of people in these circles that when you talk about the Bible, they're like, I'm not so much interested in that. But there's a lot of people that came from this, and it was like the sea that they swam in. So in that, I feel like kindred souls in some sense.
Yes. Yeah, we're both also former Pentecostals, so of that vein. So I have that connection too. I like talking about that. It's kind of my guilty pleasure talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We got a few guests in here. I'm going to bring them. Let me see if I could just bring the chat in here, and I'll wind up putting the chat. See if this isn't too aggravating. That's too aggravating. Rather than it. How about that? There you go. Right in the middle.
That works. That doesn't exist. I question my own existence every once in a while, Felicia. So it's all right.
Yeah. Everyone in chat, I appreciate y'all joining. We are going to make another go at Mike from Answers in Atheism next week. We had a little bit of a flub on that. There was some very serious technical issues that we could not overcome, but we'll try to have Mike on next week. And it looks like he's doing a lot better. But thank y'all for joining. And so the topic that you picked was kind of the historicity of Jesus, who the guy actually was. I think there's a few things that you throw on there, and I kind of pulled that, I guess, out of what you were mentioning. I think that'd be a really good subject. I think we both have a little bit of knowledge on the subject, and I'd love to get into it.
I also talk a lot about deconversion, and part of my deconversion process was dealing with the life of Christ and dealing with Jesus as a historical figure, because as I said off stage, 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says, if Jesus is not raised from the dead, then our faith is useless and we are of all men most miserable, because we've done all these things. And I agree with him on that assessment. Without the resurrection of Jesus, you really don't have a Christianity. There's nothing. The historicity of the resurrection was key. When I was in apologetics class at Trinity, the apologetics professor said, if we don't have a historical Jesus, then what are we doing here? Like,
right.
what are we about? And so it became a big question for me in my education years. Later on, I taught the life of Christ in all my churches, and had to deal with the historicity of the events all the time. And there's, of course, probably I would say there are three historical camps. One, that the Gospels are completely accurate, their history, they're all of that stuff. That's probably the standard of every believer. But then there's two others. The one is more fostered like people like Bart Ehrman, who say, yeah, he's a historical figure, but there's a whole bunch of legendary, mythological development that goes into that. But he will cite the fact that Josephus and Tacitus at least talk about the life of Jesus and things or at least mention him, kind of indicates he might be a real person.
Right.
It's short, brief evidence, but it's evidence nonetheless. Most of the people that go that route don't really try to use the Gospels that much other than their existence. Like, we have multiple sources. We don't know who wrote them, really.
Yeah.
We don't know where they got their sources from. We don't know any of that, but at least somebody's writing about this character, Jesus. So maybe.
Sure.
And then the third camp is probably more a Richard Carrier type, which is like, no, this is just straight up a myth. It's mythological development. And to be fair, that's a minority position, but the majority of scholars' argument has one flaw that I always point out. The majority of scholars on many issues have been wrong at times, like with new evidence presented and things like that.
Yeah.
So, it's an argument from popularity, it's a popular idea. So
let me ask you this, Ed. Do you sit more in the camp that Jesus was likely a real person, we just don't know much about him, or that everything that we kind of know about him was a little bit exaggerated or whatnot? Or where are you at on it all?
That's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because I'm not really sure where I sit on it, because I listen to both sides, and both sides have some very good points. Richard Character points out that you get writings later, so it's very easy for it to be a mythological character that they're just running with. And that's a valid point, but there's also these mentions on occasion. Of course, there's problems with it, like Josephus has been edited. That account has been edited. Tacitus is really just mentioning the followers of Jesus, not necessarily Jesus himself.
Right.
And then you got the other
when
side.
You're saying edited, Ed, are you talking about the Testimonium Flavium specifically?
It's like there's a definite textual variant there. And so somebody came along later and added some stuff and mixed it in. And that makes what Josephus says kind of hard to really decipher. It becomes I think historians, they don't like textual additions like that, because then they have to unravel what is history and what is the addition where somebody had their beliefs imposed, and it becomes difficult. So for me, this question has always been going in between those two views. Is Jesus a myth, or is he a very well-developed legend that kept growing and growing over time? And the Gospels if you look at all the Gospels, you grab all the pseudo Gospels too, you see this growing story. You start out with just the teachings of Jesus, and then somebody adds a little historical flavor, and you get to Mark, and Mark is finally developing this story. There's a full coherent story. And then Matthew and Luke add some more stuff, and then John goes completely off the rails and does all kinds of stories that nobody else talks about. And then, of course, after that, you got the Gospel of Peter, where you got a talking cross at that point. So you can see the legendary development. The question is the origin of where the start is. Was there a real teacher named Jesus of Nazareth that had teachings, and then the church just embellished all this stuff later? Or was it somebody who was brilliant enough to just make Jesus up? They just made up the character, and Hercules or Perseus, and ran with it. So the mythological. Yeah.
So I have three things that I won't lean into mythicism all the way because of a few different groups, or like a category of things. Like one is, if we think Paul is a real person, and in all reality, the only reason that we think Paul is a real person is because of the scholarship consensus on what's agreed to be the Paulinian documents. So we have the pseudepigraphic documents that are contested books of Paul, and then we have those that we think were of Paul. But the only reason that we think they were of Paul is it looked like they're the same hand, that it's the same person. And subsequently we say, okay, this is Paul's text. But in those, Paul talks about like talking with James, which is the brother of Jesus. So even if Paul didn't meet Jesus, it seems like that he's talking with a brother that attests to that there was this guy. And this gives some validity too, that there was this guy at very least.
Yeah. And the mythicist answer to that is calling James the brother of Jesus actually referring to like his family lineage, or is it just a title? Like, is it a ecclesiastical title? And that's where the mythicists will say the brother of Jesus might just be his title, maybe an early title as a bishop or whatever that. And I'm like, well, I can see that, but I don't think the language supports that.
Yeah, I don't think the language
does either. So it's like but even when you have Paul, like the creed in 1 Corinthians 15, he's got that from somebody else. Like he's just reciting something that already existed. And so it's like, what is that based on? Like, is that a historical record, or is it something else entirely? Is it just a creed? So even with Paul, you got the confirmation of certain characters like Peter and James, the Lord's brother. Okay. But that's what you have. Like, okay, we got some of the characters in the stories later.
Yeah.
There's also an argument that like Paul talks about the communion in 1 Corinthians 2.
Yeah.
And there's an argument that the gospel writers used that as part of their historicity of the actual communion because it already existed. So it's
right. This is the Luke thing that it's similar to something in Luke. But the most scholarship would date obviously Paul's writing on the subject as older than Luke's. So but it's just talking about the communion. If I had to guess, like neither one has taken from one another, that the communion was already a thing that was like established as this was a tradition. This is one of those things that they did as a tradition whenever the groups gathered, and that everybody that was a part of that grouping like knew it was a tradition. And this is just why they both speak of it. Not that one's still in the other or anything like that. If I had to guess.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of arguments around that too, but like there is a case that could be made that Paul's writing existed. And we already know that the gospel writers were using various sources. Luke and Matthew obviously used Mark. To me, that's the most logical reason to see it, because they're just quoting him verbatim many times. And then I can see where they grabbed Paul's thing and kind of lined up the wording, in there with their wording in the historical account that they want to present, or whether it's history or not is debatable. But you have the problem with all of this is there's questions all the way around. I think what Christians don't realize is how much debate there can be on whether or not Jesus existed. That's the main issue. Like it's not as cut and dry as the Christian in the pew thinks it is. They open up their Bible, they read the gospel, and they think, oh, that's just confirmed history. And it's like, no, it's not really. Like it's stories, it's collected stories. When you realize what the gospels are, they're a writer collecting the stories of Jesus that are being told orally and trying to put some sort of order to them. And depending on when you decide the gospels are written, even if you take an early date, you're still dealing with a couple decades between Mark and Jesus's supposed existence. So it's like you have 20 years of the stories being retold and retold and retold. And then the Gospel of Mark gets out there for a couple decades, even if you take the early dates. And then Matthew and Luke come in and they add stuff. And some of it's even apologetics already. Like I think the guard at the tomb story in Matthew is like somebody pointed out that maybe the disciples stole the body, And Matthew writes that story in to kind of answer that question. It still doesn't really answer the question or get rid of the idea that they could have stolen the body. It just tells a story to kind of explain it.
Well,
and so it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard.
It is. And I'll tell you what, where I go on this subject specifically about the resurrection is that it's very possible that the tomb story, because the tomb story is not the oldest text. The oldest text by dating of scholarship is this 1 Corinthians 15 that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
They date that as the oldest written account of a resurrection. And when Paul's writing that, he uses this Greek word tephos for buried, which is a verb word for buried. Like that Jesus was buried and that he was resurrected. So he doesn't even talk about a tomb. He talks about Jesus as if he was buried. And then we get the Gospel of Mark. It was the first one that mentions a tomb. And then everybody's kind of going with the tomb thing.
Yep.
But my thought is like Paul in the original and the oldest text, he creates the narrative that Jesus had to have been resurrected. Like, otherwise it's all for nothing, right? So now every Christian is like, oh yeah, then the resurrection had to have happened because it's all for nothing. But in those texts, and I know you well know, in 15 and verse 12, Paul outright says it's like he's talking to someone that doesn't believe the resurrection happened. I'm going to pull it up, actually. I just wanted for people to know what it is we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is 1 Corinthians 15 verse 12. It says, now if Christ is proclaimed raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? So it appears that even in the church of Corinth that Paul is addressing, that there are people that are followers of Christ that doesn't believe the resurrection happened.
Resurrection,
So that's very early on. There's people that don't think a resurrection happened.
Yeah, so it's one of those problematic things because we think that the early church had these certain beliefs and that the resurrection was just a solid thing, but that's not true. Like the 1 Corinthians 15:12 passage tells us there were Christians that were following Christianity, but they didn't believe in a resurrection. They didn't think it was a thing. And so from a doctrinal point of view, from my master's degree theological studies, which is research oriented, that's a very telling statement by Paul because it's talking to me about early church doctrine and theology, and they didn't have a developed resurrection theology at all. They were still fighting about this. They were still talking about it, and that's very telling to me about the resurrection of Jesus. Like it's a story to them, but some people believe it and don't believe it, but they're all still followers of Jesus. So it's like, what is going on here? And so it's very interesting to me, the theological development of that. But
Paul seems to be all in on convincing the groups that the resurrection happened, though. He's all in on, this side of it happened. And he seems so in on it that he does, this is not too far down from there. He says that he appeared to as many as 500. He doesn't name any of them, obviously, of who he appeared to. But he's doubling down on the literature that he's writing to the letters that he's writing to the churches, saying, no, you like, first of all, if you don't believe this, it's all for nothing,
it's a very emotional appeal he makes.
Right. The reason that I mentioned this, Ed, and I know you've probably talked to people that will have this conversation that says, well, why would they have even made that up? That they had no reason to make the burial up. Well, but if Paul threw the gauntlet down in advance before all of that writing and said that we're still in our sins and that all of our efforts are futile if the resurrection didn't happen, then he's already threw down the imperative that we have to accept the resurrection. We just have to.
Yeah, because he's kind of saying like we've done all this work, and it's a very sunk cost fallacy kind of statement. Like what absolutely. It very much is. Like he's like, we've done all this stuff. If this isn't real, then we've wasted a whole bunch of time and a whole bunch of our life. So we can't have that. So we got to keep going with this.
Right.
Like,
all in. Pushing all of his chips in, all in, and everybody else should push all into. This resurrection happened.
Yeah, so it's that's kind of course, from my perspective, when I realized that that's what Paul was doing, it's like, well, that's kind of suspicious, Paul. Like, it's and even if I take the Pauline letters as genuine Paul, the ones that are, I became realization that some of Paul's arguments for the resurrection are kind of weak. Like he's going very into his own personal experience. He's I had, even in the book of Acts, when he talks about his experience, he kind of mixes them up every once in a while, but he also, it's like, I had this personal experience, so therefore I'm going to keep going with it. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of people in ancient antiquity that had personal experiences with their gods, and some of those gods are resurrected gods. So why are they dismissed and I got to stay with you? Like, I think the thing with Paul is I think he dealt with a lot of this because the Greek philosophical traditions were definitely there. And I'm sure that if he was wandering around, he had ended up debating some. He had Mars Hill and all that stuff. So he got probably countered about this stuff, but he kept going because of his personal experience. It didn't have anything to do with whether or not, like, he doesn't seem to indicate he met Jesus. He doesn't seem to, like, even in his writings, he doesn't relay a lot of the stories of Jesus. He just writes, about the churches. And it's like, and I think it's because he didn't really know, like, he didn't have any personal experience with Jesus himself. He just had his road to Damascus experience, which is questionable. And then
questionable at best. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, and so you have him writing about this stuff. So it's a very strange argument that we're just going to keep going because we believe this for so long.
Yeah.
It's got to be true, or we're wasting our time, and I can't be wasting my time. And it's like, so I don't know.
Yeah. I think the New International Version, the New International Version updated edition, the word that it uses is futile. I don't know what the Greek word is to describe it, but it's basically that if this isn't true, then all our efforts are futile. They're all for nothing. They're just a complete waste of time. But I don't think everybody in the early church felt like that. I don't think everybody in the early church felt like that they had to accept the resurrection. And then when we see other groups, we see like documentation from other groups. I'm not the Essenes. I was trying to think of the name of the Gnostics, for example. Many of the Gnostics believe more of a spiritual resurrection, that his spirit went up, but that they didn't think that there was a bodily resurrection, right?
Yeah. Well, that became the conflict, the early church conflict was Jesus actually a bodily person? Like, because they had this notion that the physical was evil and the spiritual was good. And so did Jesus actually appear, or was he some sort of apparition? Projection. Yeah. And that's what happened. Like, he didn't really die. He didn't really resurrect. He just was immune to all that. It just appeared that way. And so the Gnostic tradition is very interesting because it's early on too. They have their own teachings about who Jesus is and wasn't, and their claims were, just because of the conflict that happened, they are the ones that are pushed aside, and the Orthodox position comes a thing, but it's more of a political, religious struggle than anything else that they got dismissed. But they are a very early tradition. A lot of the other gospels come from them. Like, so like they're the ones that write a lot of them. And so they have a very different view. And so that leads to us is the resurrection story. This is where, like, Apologia's minimal witnesses theory and others, like, you don't need a whole bunch of people to actually see a resurrected Jesus. You just have to have one person that has influence with a very sincere belief that they saw a resurrected Jesus, and what did they actually see becomes a question. And that's all you need. And you have another group of people that believe that person very sincerely, and away you go, you have a religion. So the fact that the Gnostics exist kind of indicates that there was some debate among Christians themselves as to what Jesus was and who he was.
Yeah.
And there was this early conflict, and that makes it very difficult for historicity. Because if you're
it's not just the Gnostics though, Ed. We had the Montanists. We had all different types of movements that they took it a different way. And some of these people even wind up that were a part of the early church, like Priscilla, for example, I've mentioned many times. She was really close to Paul's ministry, but after Paul, she ran to the Montanists to be a Montanist. Now, later, the church wound up calling the Montanists and all heretics and all, that they had lost the way. But Priscilla, which is a person that's mentioned like 5 or 6 times in the Bible and spoken very well of by Paul, her and her husband, they ran off to be Montanists because they thought that was what the truth was. And these are biblical characters.
Yes, and that's the thing. Like you see these people mentioned by Paul, and you start tracking down some of their histories, and you have their mentions in other places, and it's like that's exactly true. Like they disagreed with the main line of Christianity, went in a different direction. And so this notion that there's this unified belief about the resurrection very early on, that's not a very valid claim when you really think about it. Like there's a whole bunch of different views on what the resurrection was or what it meant. Was it spiritual? Was it metaphorical? Was it historical? And that becomes a real issue. And so this historical question has been around since the beginning. Like it's been what actually happened. And when I was learning all this, like I'm like, okay, this isn't what I was taught in the pew. This isn't what I was taught when I was under a pastor. You know, like I was always told this was a historical thing that you could bank on this. This is facts you could take to the bank. And it's like, no, it's not. Like not even among early Christians would they have considered that. And that's just it became problematic for me all my Christian life after that. Like it was like I was constantly wrestling with this issue. And that's why the historicity is so important. But my own view now is like I can see the possibility of a rabbi like figure being so beloved by the people that maybe somebody after his actual death had a very deep emotional experience and decided to immortalize this character by saying he rose from the dead. I also can see that it's complete fabrication of some brilliant person who wanted to write a story, and then everybody took the story very seriously. Like, did this really happen? And so there's so many possibilities. Like my answer is it myth or is it legend or what is it? It's like there's a lot I know, but there's also a lot I don't know. Yeah. And until I get like some more definitive historical work or somebody discovers something or something, I don't know if I can say definitively one way or the other. Both sides have good cases. There's a whole bunch of different things about the history of Jesus. It's like it feels like Bart Ehrman says there had to be a founder, so why not Jesus of Nazareth kind of thing. Yeah. That's kind of his argument. Whereas Carrier's like going, well, you don't actually need the actual historical person to have a story. Like, and he'll reference other myths.
Yes, he does. So like, Jesus Benanias is a big one that's brought up a lot. And the reason that I think there's some truth to Benanias' character, which if y'all don't know it, Benanias is mentioned in Josephus's writing, The War of the Jews, specifically in, I think, book 6, chapter 5, which I was reading a little while ago, just to try to get the exact wording of how he described Benanias. But we're talking about somebody that their ministry started around 62. 3 years, there was a lot of tension, but it was obviously, this was right before the temple came down. And he said that the temple was going to fall. To hear Josephus talk about him, that he is a prophet that walked in the streets and said that the temple was going to come down. And there's he goes on to write that Benanias was, he was arrested and that he was beaten till to his bone, basically that he was whipped to his bone and he was bloody, and that he still said, that woe is Jerusalem. That something great and something bad was going to happen to Jerusalem. And whenever I see texts like this, I see a lot of similarities when he's doing from the east to the west and everything that he's saying, that this is the end and to woe to Jerusalem. And this is a guy named Jesus that's prophesying in the street. Yeah. I think, well, either it's based off of Benanias, or Benanias is another Jesus character that was a prophetic character that they wind up kind of mixing them together and kind of created a unified kind of Jesus. But just because people don't know who's who and they're reading about a Jesus character that was prophesying, and but in the story with Benanias, Benanias was there at the end when the temple was being destroyed, and there was a catapult, if I'm not mistaken, a boulder from a catapult hit him and killed him, is what Josephus says. So he might be a character that is a large, contributor to the story. Yeah, like there is that theory that what Jesus is a conglomerate character of various messianic people that lived at the time, and they just kind of
mesh the different stories and put them together and put it into one individual that was a messianic character.
Yeah.
And that would be a very brilliant mythological development, but not unheard of. Like taking two characters and mashing them together is very normal. Like you see that in, like there's some people that talk about the tall tales in the United States, like Paul Bunyan and stuff. Is that a conglomeration of different lumberjacks that were famous and things like that? And they just created one big character to represent them all. So that's very possible with Jesus. You know, I always say like the Monty Python scene where you have all the messianic people preaching the street. That's a little bit more true than fiction. Like there's a lot of messianic characters because of the messianic prophecy narrative that was going on at the time. They were claiming that they were the guy. And so, you know, there's even like some Christians, like maybe Barabbas was doing that. That was kind of his shtick too. So it's like, there's a very real possibility that this is a conglomerate character. And that's where the mythicists kind of pounce and they say, well, yeah, it's very possible. And that's the thing. We got all these doors of possibilities. We don't know really which one is the real door. Like it's hard to pin it down. And that fact alone was like very damaging for my faith for a long time. And eventually it pushed me over the edge, because it was like, if I can't get a real lock on who this Jesus is because he's so central to my faith, it becomes a real difficult issue to hold on to your faith. And I think a lot of Christians just don't know that. They don't know that this debate exists. Like it's never, because if you start talking about it to a lot of Christians, they go, oh, I didn't know that. Like I realized that this was a debate. This was a thing. I've got it all the time on my channel. Oh, it's established fact that Jesus was a historical person. I'm like, hold on. Wait,
not sure you know what you're talking about.
It's like, no, it's not. It's like there's some valid cases to be made. I think the Gospels are inherently problematic when it comes to history, because every one of them has a theological agenda. And they're all Christians too, so they've already bought into the story. Yeah. And the real problem is I don't know who they are really. Like,
there's that, but there's like, another bigger problem for me, Ed, that when we actually look at the timelines that we lay people out, like now, if we do like the critical scholarship timelines and we look at these books now and start them from that timeline, you realize that there's a development. Like, I'll give you two primary examples. Two primary is the oldest text of the resurrection is Paul starts it. He uses the word buried, right? He doesn't talk about a tomb at all. And then Mark is the next one in the time frame, and he doesn't talk about, in the oldest one, he doesn't even talk about the resurrection, just that the body wasn't there. Right. And then later we get the resurrection stories. And then by the time we get to John, Mark or Luke adds the seals on the door, right? There's these seals. And then by the time we get to John, we have two guards that are guarding the stones, right? So there's this constant development. And then when we get to like the Gospel of Peter that you were mentioning earlier, now the cross comes out behind him and testifies that he paid his right, right? So there's this snowball effect of the more we go down the time scale, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But we don't just get it with this subject. We also get it with the virgin birth. Paul is the oldest text. Paul never mentions virgin birth, not a single time. It's Mark not in the book of Mark. It's right. And even the Johannines, which were totally separated from them, and they were kind of doing their own thing, they never had anything about a virgin birth. So this seems to be lore development also. You know, it's not in the oldest stuff.
It's not in the oldest stuff, and it just becomes problematic. It's like, you can see the development of it. Like whether the mythicists are right or the historical people like Bart Ehrman are right, they all acknowledge this development issue. Like they all say, there's definitely some legendary development here, regardless of which way you go. It's the real question is, okay, was Jesus a real person or not? You can't really answer that question. But what you can say is there's a mythological development here where things are added and added and added, and it gets, if you look at all the Gospels, including all the pseudo ones that weren't included in the canon, you can see this. Like you can absolutely see the development. And so it's kind of, that became problematic to me too, because when I was in the church, when I was a young person before I went off to Bible college and seminary, there was never any mention of all these other gospels. Like it just never entered into anybody's mind. And then I get to Bible college and they start talking about the Gospel of Peter. I'm like, what the hell is the Gospel of Peter? Like, and it's like, and you start looking at this stuff and it's like, oh, and so I don't know. I can't fall in any camp right now. I think the debate is, we're at a debate stage about this and we still don't know enough to make a definitive conclusion, but I see both sides. I can see where they, and so it's like, I can sit there and say, I can shrug my shoulders. I really don't know, but I do know this, that the character of Jesus has been developed over the Gospels.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some stuff that are added and brought in. And Paul's kind of, he's kind of the first statement about the resurrection, but even he is writing, if I take the earliest thing of Corinthians, he's got to be writing at least 15 years later. Like, even if I take the most conservative evangelical type, and it's like I think
they date it 56, 57 at best, right? Is where they're dating this. So this is a little while later.
So you're still dealing with 2 decades worth of stories told by the early church at that point that are just circulating around before it even gets onto pen and paper. It's, and so it's like, okay, that's a lot of time for story development and things like that. So it's like, it makes it hard to be definitive. It just really does. So,
and there's a more nefarious side of this possibility also. And that's that when we had all of these heretical papers, when we had the decrees to destroy all these heretical documents, that the much older documents that may have existed that could have been more of the source material. We look now and we're like, oh, well, the closest one to Jesus is like, 55, 60, but it could have been that there were older ones, but when they were reviewed and you're kind of destroying what's you consider heretical, that they see this and they're like, no, this is heretical. This explicitly says that Joseph was the father, or something like that, and they want to go with the virgin birth thing. So they're like, no, this is heretical. And they might have been destroying some of the oldest real source document, but it wasn't aligning with their canonical ideas.
Yeah. So there's also all these purges of literature that kind of damage the case in the end, because we have a lot of things there's a lot of lost books, for instance, that like the church fathers will talk about certain writings of certain people. And it's like, we don't even have those because they're gone. Like they're gone. And so what would they have told us? I don't know. So at the end of the day, it's like, could have been a real person, might not have been. And that's not a definitive statement if you're going to believe Paul saying we have to do this because we've invested so much time in it. And so, and when you look at, that's kind of way a lot of church people are. They're like, I've invested so much time in this belief in the resurrection. What do I do? It's a sunk cost fallacy thing. And so they cling to it. And I remember having conversations over the years in my chat, as my channel's been there, about this issue. And a lot of them go, I didn't know that. And that's like, they don't know. And that makes it so there's that. But I don't know. It's just, it becomes since I've deconverted, it's like, it's a different question. Like I don't have I've divorced myself from the spiritual beliefs and all this stuff now. And so it's like, I'm like, well, I get what Bart Ehrman's saying. I get what Richard Carrier is saying. I can look at both of them and all the other people that say the similar things that they do and go, you know what? You all have great points, but none of you have really hit the home run for me. Like you're just, it's like, I don't have this feeling like somebody has knocked it out of the park yet. Like, I feel like the game is still being played and I'm not going to make a definitive statement about who's going to win this one yet. And I don't think I can, however I will, You know, like I don't know if I ever will be able to make that.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that these days.
Me too. But let me tell you something me and Kurt mentioned. We've talked about the subject before. When you say that it was based on a real person, like what does that really mean? In what sense was it based on a real person? Even if it was based, let's say, for example, that the whole basis of the character was based on this Benanias guy that was profiting in the street and saying, you know, that the end of Jerusalem is coming. Let's say, for example, that this was the Jesus that this whole thing was based off on. In what sense then does the Jesus character that is in the Bible, I mean, he has little to no similarity. I mean, there's a few things you can get there, but all the doctoral things, it all just seems to be addition. You know, like it just gets pushed in there. And then another thing is we see in John a later addition that we know wasn't in the original text. It got added much later, which was the story at the woman taken in adultery, right? Where Jesus says the one without sin cast the first stone. This is not any of the oldest texts. No, we know this got added considerably later, that this got added. So somebody is thinking about this situation and like, what would Jesus do in this situation where they're going to stone this woman? And he has now imposed his morality through the lens of the character Jesus, right? And he's created this more of the moral character of Jesus. He just pinned it in. He made what it is that Jesus is, right, out of his own moral ideology.
Yeah, that's a good example. But even the end of Mark being longer is also another one, because you see somebody editing the story because we have these theological beliefs about Jesus now. And so we're going to pen in the resurrection. We're going to pen in the miracle claims. We're going to pen in all this other stuff. And it's not just a moral development, it's also a theological development that's taken place. And they wanted to make sure that got in there. Like they didn't have this notion about the Gospels that they shouldn't be edited or changed or anything. There was definitely people that were doing this. And it's a different mentality than we have today. Like, and so I don't know, I look at I thought your argument about the moral imposition was very good, because it's like, okay, we're getting this character Jesus that's looking at things like adultery a little bit differently, morally speaking, and they wanted to put that in and give the moral authority of the Jesus character to it. And so I thought that was a very interesting discussion, because it's like, okay, this kind of tells me that people can make stuff up to change the morality for the better. So did that happen with the rest of the stories?
That's the big question. That's the big question. So do people have their own moral narrative of like, this and that isn't right, this isn't right, that isn't right, and now they're just like imbuing this character with the same views that, this isn't right, because they already see him as a hero. And now it's just interpolation. I see this as right. I see this icon, this character as right. Therefore, I see this character as doing these things. And then you get this interpolation that just builds the character. Over years.
I mean, the equivalent might be somebody who, I've seen Socrates in the chat, but like Socrates, there are other stories that appear about Socrates that Plato doesn't write. And I almost feel like it's the same thing. Like they're adding a story to kind of illustrate their point. And is that what's happening in the Gospels, where people are putting together these stories to illustrate their point? And it becomes very problematic as to whether they're historical when you have that situation existing where people are adding things because of their logical or moral viewpoint. Okay, well, what about the original stories? Is this a theological moral viewpoint? Is this, it's pretty clear that the gospel writers had some sort of agenda. They all seem to have this different agenda that you can kind of get from reading them.
Yeah.
So is that what it's about? Or are any of the gospels really about the historical nature of the accounts in the first place? Like, it brings up all these questions, and that's why we're all shrugging our shoulders as to the historicity of Jesus. Like, who is he? What is he? What is he designed to do as a character? And I've been analyzing that question since I deconverted. Like, who is this guy? He's still kind of like a character.
There's almost nothing we can know.
Yeah.
It's all through the lens of other people.
And I'm like, shrug my shoulders. Don't know. But that kind of viewpoint doesn't lead to the assurity of faith that a lot of people have about Jesus. And it's like, you can't do that. And I don't know, I've gotten to the point where if there is a character at the center of all this, it's not that character. I don't think, this is my opinion, so I'll take it for what it's worth. If there is a central character to the story that started this whole thing, I don't think the person himself is actually what started it.
Yeah.
I think you have like Peter and Paul kind of, they're the ones that become the origin of the mythology part. They're the ones that come then add all this. And so I'm not going to yell at the Jesus character. Like if he is a conglomerate of all these messianic figures, I'm not going to yell at them for what happened. It's like somebody took all these myths, shoved them together, and then they used this to promote their religion, their new sect of Judaism at first, and then later its own religion, Christianity. I'm not going to yell at this origin character, whoever they may be, whether myth or whatever. Can't really do that. Like it's very possible he's just a Jewish rabbi that pissed off the Jewish leaders enough where he got crucified for it. That's very, very well be possible.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to blame that person for, what happened later. Like I can't say, yeah, he's the problem. Like whoever this myth is, you can't really do that. And that becomes difficult for a lot of Christians when I tell them that. Like I don't know what they do with that. I don't know what they, like it shattered my faith that if Jesus isn't a historical figure, then I have wasted my time. I have, like Paul is correct, but I'm not going to do the sunk cost fallacy that he does and say, I'm going to stick with it. I'm like, I know sunk cost is a fallacy. I'm going to get out of this, I'll get better evidence, so.
This is what I think of Jesus as. I think that a character come and he had some heartfelt, positions about things. To what degree his positions, I don't think we know. But I think there was this proposition that there was this hero. And if you can imagine in a classroom, if the teacher says, okay, a hero just left out of the classroom here, and he was a hero that come to save us. Everybody, let's talk about and we're going to go around the room and see what the hero was and what he did. And then one person after another was like, he fed everybody. He fed, like everybody was hungry and he fed them, right? Okay, next one. And then you go around the class and there's kind of this group effort. And what they're really saying though, Ed, is what is a hero? It's what they're really saying. They're asking the people, and those people are projecting like what it is that is a hero. And now they're creating a character in the aggregate of that question. And that seems to be what Jesus really is.
A good example.
He's the collective.
He's the collective mindset of what everybody thinks about that character.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, at the Gospels as literature, as story, that's kind of what comes out. And you have 4 different like schools of thought with the Gospels of who Jesus was, really. Like they do have some differences. Like Mark is very low key about Jesus's divinity. Like he avoids that. He's just a really super powered man. The Jews just wanted their own Hannibal. Okay, that's a good one.
I didn't mean to start throwing them all on the screen.
Oh, it's fine. But yeah,
they're all smaller.
Yeah, well, I see a lot of familiar names, and I think it was one of my followers, Michael, says, "Yeah, guess what? This chat is owned by the Fluffle right now." So, and I see a lot of those guys there. But yeah, it's like it becomes like, did these people use the character of Jesus to project their stuff? And like you're saying, like they developed different schools of thought. You had the Gnostics over here. Well, Jesus wasn't a real hero. He was like this projection of a hero that we were supposed to emulate. And then you have the other ones going, no, he's a real person. And the classroom analogy is really good. Like, it's like, what do you think? And it's becoming more about a discussion about what is the Messiah? What is the messianic figure that the Jews were waiting for, because you get different answers in the Gospels. Like Matthew is like all in, it wasn't Herod, it was this guy, like, and he spends a lot of time dealing with the Herodians. And then you get Luke, it's like, okay, and he's a Messiah figure for the Gentiles, because you do see that with Luke a little bit. And John is like, yeah, he's just super powered. He's just over the top. He's Spider-Man incarnate. He's claiming to be the king.
He's the Logos. He's the Logos.
He is the Logos. Like superhero name Logos. It's like, and so And so it's like this development. So your analogy is actually a very good one. And that, however, is very problematic for history because everybody's ginning the story to their narrative. And that's why you can, I've used the Spider-Man multiverse thing. Like you have different versions of Spider-Man. And that's very much what the Gospels do. You have very different versions of Jesus. And they're sometimes very hard to reconcile. And that's a problem for historicity. It is, because it's like, if it's a historical character, there should be some narrative that's completely the same all the way through. And it just doesn't work out that way. Even when they copy Mark, like there's some edits here and there. Like, yeah, I can't remember exactly, but I remember one of them being very theologically significant. Like Matthew or Luke kind of embellishes a part that Mark took and kind of says, oh, add a little few notes here.
Well, that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. But what's interesting and probably very telling about it is Luke and Matthew had two different lineages to Jesus, right? They're two totally different lineages. And I've thought about it before, and like why, if there was a different source text other than Mark that had the lineages, like why didn't they have the same lineages? Why did they do this? Why do they have two separate ones? Because now there's all these problems, and you see apologetics does this all the time. Oh, well, one goes to Mary, that's but there's nothing in that text that says that. Like at 100% is talking about Joseph's lineage.
Yeah, it ends with Joseph. Like it doesn't end with Mary. It ends with Joseph. And then the other one ends with Joseph. So it's like, okay, sorry, you have two very different lineages that all say they're for Joseph.
Right.
And I used to shut apologists down even when I believed about that. I said, that's not what the text says. Like text
you have to impose your will on the text and make them say something different so that they align. But whenever the more I started thinking about this once I come out of church, and I realized like the time frame and how they're saying that Mark was kind of the OG here, is Mark didn't have a lineage. That's why those two are contradictory, is because Mark, if Mark would have had a lineage, those two would not have been contradictory because they would have been able to snatch that from Mark.
Yeah, and that's where the Matthew tradition and like Luke tradition come out, because they are different.
Yeah,
and it's not just that; it's like the way they tell the virgin birth story is completely different too. Like there's they have a very different way of viewing it. You can reconcile them, but it's like it's very different, because I don't think that Matthew and Luke, with their own unique material, were comparing notes. And so they were just like writing. And that's why the lineages became problematic. But I used to yell at apologists even when I believed about that. I said, you're trying to impose something that isn't there.
Yeah.
It's like, when I was in Bible college, we learned about this thing called eisegesis, where you're reading your meaning into the text.
Yes.
That's exactly what you're doing. Like you're reading what you want to be there into the text, and it doesn't say that. Yeah. And you get that with the historicity question all the time, because a lot of the historicists, like my usual problem with Bart Ehrman is like, he'll say this is an authentic teaching of Jesus and this isn't. I'm like, how do you make that differentiation?
How do you make that distinction?
Like, how do you know that? Like, it's like, how would you figure out what the authentic teachings of Jesus are to make a comparison? Like, what are you talking about? And that's one of his weakest arguments, in my opinion, is the teachings of Jesus. Because it's like, you're picking and choosing what you want. Like you're imposing your will on what you want from the teachings of Jesus. I like this part, so I'm going to keep it. And I don't like this part, and I'm not going to keep it. Or it sounds too weird or whatever. It's amazing how that works. It's like when Lacona, like, I kind of believe the resurrection accounts, but that zombie apocalypse, I think that's an addition. Like you're choosing your resurrection accounts at this point, because you realize the one's embarrassing, and the other. And the other one, that doesn't make any sense. And you want to keep the other one because it's key to Christianity. Like, it's like, okay.
I'll tell you why they do it, though. Obviously, Ed, why they do it is because if one person died and resurrected and not everybody saw them, obviously we could account for that in the Roman historical record, that they just didn't see him, so it's not in the record. Whereas if, I don't know if it's Luke or if it's Matthew that says that when he died, that all the rocks cried out and all the bodies come out of the grave, right?
And there's
if that happened, that's going to be in Roman history. That would have made the paper for sure. But we don't find it in history, so that's problematic to obviously think that, like, thousands of graves opened and people, started walking the earth. That's a little problematic.
You also have like an eclipse, an earthquake, and a bunch of people getting out of the dead graves. I think Pilate's chronicler might have mentioned that,
you would think.
You would think that that's something, all those three things happening at once might have been mentioned by somebody.
Yeah.
And I get that's an argument
for everyone.
I get it. But somebody, something that catastrophic would have been mentioned by some people. Like even if a commenter makes a note in their journal because they're a little bit of a scholar, like a weird thing happened today. So,
but yeah, it's interesting. I think it's development. I think obviously it seems to me that it's a developmental story and that everybody kind of piles on. And what's interesting is to some degree, they're still piling on. If you think about apologetics now, like there's so many people, and even the Da Vinci Code is a good example of people who now want to show that, I've gotten secret knowledge. I've gotten information from the text that other people didn't know, and now I found this. And we have a lot of people. I've heard a lady very recently had a position about hardening your heart, that God hardens their heart. She said that she kind of had the revelation that God is like a sun, right? That the heart is like clay, and that all God does is shine the light, and it depends on what your heart is made out of, whether it hardens or it doesn't harden. And she thinks this is a revelation or something that she's now got out of the text. And this happens all the time. Apologetics, they get new messages that aren't even explicit in the text. So people are still adding to it to this very day.
Like the mythological legendary development of Jesus continues. Like the Jesus that a lot of Christians postulate, like Jesus that I know doesn't do this. Like you'll hear that expression, like, "Oh, God doesn't." Jesus doesn't condemn anybody. I'm like, dude, there's stories in this book of Jesus on the throne saying, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I will say to them that on that day." It's like, you need to read your Bible. Like you created this Jesus that's more of a buddy Jesus than a Jesus that's actually from the text. And I used to get after my parishioners for that all the time. Like, you might want to consider this text about who Jesus is and all that stuff. Like you need to go back and read your book, because Jesus is like that according to Matthew, and he's like this according to John, and got to factor that in. And so, the mythological development continues because people create. If I corner 100 Christians and ask them what they think Jesus is to them, they'll give me 100 different stories. Like they personalized it, and that's also mythological development. It's also, we continue on in this train of thought and theology about who Jesus is. And now there's a new tradition in theology about who Jesus is. And it's still going on. Jesus is constantly changing and morphing depending on the time.
Sure.
So
he is benevolent and stable, but that's the whole thing with God, right? God is a benevolent and stabilizing force inside of our own mind. He is the projection of everything we aspire to be and nothing that we don't. So definitionally, God is all moral, because whatever we conceive morality is where we put the God in that little box, right? So, that's definitely the case. No one would ever, God would never disagree with a Christian. Whenever they receive a message, God never says, "No, you've been doing it all wrong." They're always getting confirmation that you got it right. And we got different religions, though. So very interesting.
Kinds to do that,
All right. Well, that being said, if you're all right with opening the chat up, we're going to go ahead and open the chat up. I'm going to post a link here. Let's see. And we're going to get everybody, if they want to come in, I'll put that right there. If y'all want to come in on stage, if y'all got questions, if y'all, this is open Q&A time. Any questions that you have, by all means, you could put them in the chat. And if you just want to put a Q&A next to it, or just question and put a question mark on it so that we'll see it, we'll be glad to field any questions. If you do want to come into chat, you're more than welcome to come into chat. I'm going to go to the YouTube page and I'm going to pin it right quick, because pinning from in here for some reason doesn't seem to work right. I don't know why. Let's see here. All right, there we go. And we're going to pin it here. All right. But we'll start trying to do some Q&A also. And I don't mind going back and looking at a little bit of the questions that we had. I think Rimmers mentioned something earlier that I definitely did want to get back to. He mentioned his Socrates. And I do think that there, with Socrates, there was something that happened in one of the books of Plato where he's referring to Socrates in the jail when Socrates is arrested. He says that Socrates, he gives a scenario where he's talking to another inmate, and Socrates says that he would never bring charges against someone as a to get back at them. They put a charge against him, so he put a charge against them, so to speak. And Socrates has this whole dialogue with this character that Plato wasn't privy to. There's no possible way that Plato could have knew this conversation took place. It's just not possible. But he does depict the individual as having this whole conversation. Do we think that this is an actual conversation that happened? We don't. We think this is something that Plato, is transposing his moral ideals about what he thought Socrates was about. He's putting them onto the character. But that happens. Mike, how goes it, man?
Hey. So the trick is to see if my microphone's going to work.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic.
It sounds great, buddy.
Yeah,
I listened to the stream last time. I feel for you.
let me know as soon as it starts to mess up, because I'm trying a few. Well, I've got a hardwired internet connection. Now I'm getting 1 gig. So anyway, it should be okay. Anyway,
we'll bring Felicia on stage too, though. Just a second. We'll do the four pan. There you go. Perfect. 4 panels.
I won't waste too much of your time. But I did have a question for you, Ed, and I was just wondering, because maybe I missed it in the hour. What is your take on the Q source? What is your take on that? Because it's not a wholly settled debate. I'm just curious what your take is on it.
Well, I can tell you what I was educated about it when I was in seminary. Yeah, cemetery is probably the same thing. But the Q source is mostly the teachings of Jesus, and they apparently both Matthew and Luke kind of used it, but we don't actually have like the Q source. It's just we're reasoning back from the fact that both these guys do the same thing, and the wording is almost exactly word for word, and it's teachings of Jesus. There's no like historical things or anything, as I recall. And so it's a possibility, and it seems reasonable that that's a source. Like, these gospel writers weren't getting things out of the air. They were just grabbing Mark, and they were grabbing Q, and they were grabbing other sources that they had access to. Matthew and Luke are different for reasons. There's reasons they're different. So, but yeah, the Q source is basically a theoretical source that we don't actually have, but it seems to make sense seeing it's word for word quotation. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, some of them. I want to say this about the Q source and what I know about it now. I think the scholarship now doesn't think that there was a singular document that they're referring to this source. They think more that there might have been a few documents that we just don't now have, that we think that specifically Mark and Luke they have some stuff that other ones don't have, and we don't know where they would have gotten that from, except that there was a common source that they were getting the information.
Yeah,
and
like
there's a few different
there's that addition since I've been in seminary. Like, the scholarship has moved on about the Q source, where they say, well, maybe it's not one document, it might be several.
Yeah.
So it's like, and because there are some differences, and so. But there's enough similarities to think that they used a common source. And that's one of the few times other than Mark, that they seem to use a common source, because the rest of the narrative is very, very different. Like, there's a lot of very different things in the way they portray stuff.
So it may not necessarily be an actual source, but so much as maybe commonly understood things or commonly passed around things.
It could be that too. Yep.
Because some of the citations are so similar to one another, it seems almost definite that pen was on paper about it. Because when you do the word of mouth thing seems to have so much mutation. So that, I think that's why they lean more into that there was some type of documents.
It's a debatable point. We'll just put it that way. Like they debate about this. Okay, the Q source is a debatable point even among scholarly circles. So it's like, it's not like it's as definitive as the history of Jesus question. Really. So, yeah, I've kept up on this stuff, and it's like, well, okay, that just makes it worse.
Yeah. I mean, it's not unfair to hypothesize a Q source. I mean,
no,
do we seriously think that the Gospels are the first time anything was ever penned down for Jesus? I mean,
we
that's
know
ridiculous.
we know
not
that's
true.
not true. We know that's not true.
Yeah.
Because there are earlier Gospels that are just like teachings of Jesus. Like I think one of the earliest ones is just teachings of Jesus. Like there's no narrative to it.
Yeah.
So,
well, and the one that they have from Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, there's a wide variety of where they think those sources come from, with some of them dating as early as 50. So some scholars date some of those individual sayings of Jesus as early as 50 AD, whereas some of them are, they're dated as late as 200, 220. So that's the collections of the sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. The dating on those are all over the place. They seem to be a long accumulation.
The one thing you can note about this question is there's always debate about almost every source. There's debate about the historicity. There's the debate about this. It's a very complex question. Okay, it's not as simple as people want to think it is. So, and Q source is one of those that examples that. Like it's a good example of that. So.
Yeah.
So the Book of Thomas, was that the one that didn't make it into the Bible?
Yeah.
Well, the Gospel of Thomas there's the Gnostic text, and then there's another one that we have almost none of. But the one I'm talking about it's 114 sayings of Christ. It was found.
It's not in the Bible.
It's not in the Bible, and though there are some quotes of it that are almost explicitly like in Mark. So but that one, I think, there's 114 sayings or 17 sayings in total. Do you remember what it is? That are attributed to Jesus.
All right.
So I had a Catholic priest that told me that I was in the rectory. I did an AA fifth step with him, and I told him I was an atheist, and he told me I should read that book, basically, because he was talking about we were talking about spirituality, and he was amazing. He'd go around and do AA talks. He would never talk about God or Christ or anything. He would talk about this idea of spirituality as a human condition. And he was very, very interesting, and he resonated with me. So the thing is, Paul had an experience, right? Somewhere in the desert, he ran out of water, got a little dehydrated, had an experience. Right? So anyway,
I always like how Mike puts things. I really do.
Well, the thing, and Christians and atheists behave in two different ways when I tell this story. But something powerful and life-changing happened to me right before my 16th birthday. And it was on December 24th at about 9:30 p.m. I had a powerful spiritual experience. Now, Christians will tell me it wasn't the one true experience, right? Because I was an atheist before, during, and after. It wasn't about religion, right? It was a psychological experience that absolutely stunned me and changed my life. And it happened to me as a result of reading some Buddhist texts or Buddhist book by Ellen Watts, of all things, right? And it happened at a time in my life when, first of all, I was having hallucinations. They were visual hallucinations, such as the whole world turning into jelly and kind of fuzzing around and stuff. And I was under extreme stress because of my father's alcoholism and a whole bunch of other family events that happened to our family. PTSD for sure. And I had this grand mal spiritual experience that I say lasted for 3 days. Tell you the truth, I can't fucking remember how long it lasted. I know it seemed to last forever. And I went to bed, and it was like I had this perspective of and this is prior to ever doing a drug at all. I'd never done any drugs. I had done some drinking. And I had this ability to see myself as if I was hovering above me and my father, and I could see how we were interacting with each other. And it was just this clarity, and the entire world lit up like it was frosted and like it was pure white. And it was the most incredible thing. And it changed my entire life. I had some more experiences. One that was induced by a drug overdose that lasted for a week that was very similar. And of course, I've had the spiritual feeling you get after you've been through a really bad mushroom trip, right? where you get this like gratitude. So anyway, the reason I bring that up is something happened to me. I think I call it a temporal lobe meltdown. I think throughout history, we have called it a nervous breakdown. Okay, where people just completely hit their bottom and they rise up out of the ashes and they can do some new thinking, right? So, and there's some evidence that it's related to epilepsy, related to temporal lobe epilepsy, and a few other things.
Yeah, I've heard
so
this.
if this happens to you, now, if that had happened to me while I was in church and somebody was telling me about Jesus, I'd probably still be a Christian today because it was that powerful, right?
Very, very likely, yes.
Yeah, and so I'm really interested in those experiences and how that Paul thing happened. Is that what kicked him off in doing this whole Christian thing?
Didn't get him talk about it a lot. Acts talked about it a lot, which was in his writing. So I think we got him later. He said in the text that we're actually talking about the resurrection, when he said the appearance, is it later in 15 that he says that he appeared to, and then he names a few people, and then least of all to me, that he appeared to me. And I don't remember what the Greek word appeared is, but he uses the connotation of that he appeared to the 500, that he appeared to the other people. And he didn't even use the word appeared again. He said, and then last of all to me. So it's like that he appeared to the other disciples, appeared to whenever he resurrected, in the same manner, it seems, that Jesus appeared to Paul. So we don't really know, is he suggesting that he appeared in a vision or in a physical form?
Yeah,
or
that's how we're shrugging our shoulders a bit.
Yeah.
We're a feeling, a real strong presence.
It's the same thing. Like you could make the same statement, say, about Peter, that he had this feeling or this vision of Jesus, and then he ran with it, like afterwards. And so, the mental health aspects of this, nobody wants to talk about, because now that we have more documentation of this stuff, could this be what Paul was going through? Did he have a nervous breakdown, really, because of what he was doing? And then he changed his whole thing, his thinking on it? Very possible. Very possible.
Right. The other important thing is that, like, I have memories of the experience, and then I have memories of arguing with my friend Mac about it and telling other people about it. So I remember those experiences, right? So I have some evidence that this really happened. However, what happened and how long it lasts, I could have manufactured, because I've remembered it so many times. I know I was sitting in front of a register in the living room, and there was a Christmas tree. I'd gotten milk and cookies out for my little brother and sister, and I ate them so that they'd think Santa ate them. And I remember doing that, and I sat down and read this story in an Ellen Watts narrative, and that's when it happened. And then I went to bed, and that's about the only real good memories I have. The rest are, my point is that this manufacturing of memories, had I been of a if I'd been the type of person that believed in spooks and ghosts and stuff like that, I could have believed it. We lived in my grandpa's house, frontier house. I could have believed it was my grandpa visiting me, and I could have seen my grandpa. And I could have manufactured a ton of memories over this thing, because Jesus Christ, this happened 60 years ago, right? 59 years ago, and it's still following me around.
Hey, anyway, let's try to do this Q&A right quick, and then we'll jump right back into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're trying to do some of the questions in here.
Well, could I say something quickly?
Yeah.
Well, just while we're on the subject of Paul. Okay, so firstly, why was he going to Damascus? Don't think that's ever explained. Secondly, how did he know it was Jesus? He didn't know what Jesus looked like. He didn't know what Jesus sounded like.
Very good question.
I mean, let's just say, I'm extremely skeptical that this was an experience he actually had. Right. Especially if none of the other people in his party could corroborate even the fact that he had.
Hold on, there's two different versions of this. I just wanted to mention. So in the book of Acts, he mentions it, I think, in chapter 5 and in chapter 9. And in one of the texts, it says that those that were with me saw indeed the voice, but they heard, or they saw indeed the light, but heard not the voice of he who spake. And in the other text, it says that they heard the voice, but that they saw not the light. So there seems to be in one telling of the version that they didn't see anything, but they heard. But then in another version, they heard, but they didn't see. So there seems to be a continuity issue as to did the people with him see or hear or what happened? We don't know.
Something I had to deal with as a pastor all the time. People would ask that question. Like, these are two different accounts. What's going on here?
Well, it's a bit more than a continuity issue. That's a direct.
Yeah.
Well, the reason it's not a direct contradiction is because of the word here specifically that's used in the Greek. And that's the reason that I don't mark it as a contradiction, is because here could mean hear or it could mean understand. And it's been used with both connotations. So it could be that true. In one of the texts that it said that they didn't understand in some sense, though there's still an issue a little bit with the light or with seeing.
The seeing part is a contradiction.
It's problematic.
You can't get around that one.
It's a problematic story. I mean, nonetheless, to be the only account of him seeing, this vision appearing, it's a little problematic.
It's not a vision, right? At no point does he says, "I saw Jesus." Right? That's the point right there.
He appeared least of all to me.
Yeah.
He does say that in his own.
There's no way that he could know that it's Jesus, and so that's absolutely when we say, I saw Jesus.
You know how he knows it's Jesus.
Hang on, I know.
The same reason when we have a dream, we know who the character is.
But I think if he'd seen Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever, some manifestation of the bodily resurrected Jesus, then when he got to Peter, he could have said, "Oh, this is what he looked like. Is that Jesus?"
Yeah,
but he doesn't say that.
That's a different guy.
He doesn't ever mention the story. He never talks about that at all. So,
I am extremely skeptical, shall we say, that Paul.
You and me both.
Well, that Paul isn't. For all I know, Paul could be completely mythical. Yeah. I mean, that could just be somebody made up and associated with somebody who's they found the writings of, right?
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
But he does in the writings identify himself as Paul, and we have the contested and the uncontested. So we do think that a large part of them that call themselves Paul, and again, we do have some that call themselves Paul that we don't think are Paul. But no. That we think it's the same writer, Simos. Not that we know that it's a Paul.
Fine. Same writer, fine. But at no point do we have any original documents in the Bible at all. None of the Bible is original documents.
It's fair.
So, when people say, "Oh, well, no, he said I'm Paul," that doesn't make any difference whatsoever.
We're going to tackle these damn Q&A
if I'm trying to be skeptical. Right. Okay. Sorry. That's just some of it. I had another one as well, but look, we'll leave it. Let's go to Q&A.
So the Q&A here was there's less evidence for the historical figures like Socrates and William Wallace. Do you doubt their existence too? Two things on the subject. First of all, there's not less evidence for Socrates because Socrates has two people that knew Socrates directly that writes about him. One being Plato writes about him and the other being Xenophon that writes about him. Both of them actually learned underneath
there's
Socrates.
More evidence for Socrates than
so Socrates is I think Socrates, Xenophon wound up being a general of the war, and we know that Xenophon writes about him fondly, and so does Plato writes about him quite fondly, and they're direct firsthand experiences, and they say they learned and were taught under him. So that is a firsthand experience. As to William Wallace, there's no letters from that one.
More than first-hand, those are eyewitnesses.
Yes, those are eyewitnesses. Yes, those are eyewitnesses.
Get that strange before the Christians start going, "Oh, what does first-hand experience mean?"
Those are eyewitnesses.
They met the guy, they saw the guy, they spoke to the guy.
Shook his hand. That sort
of thing. They said they were taught by him. They sit at his feet.
They're Greeks, so who knows what they did.
Yes.
They may have done more. Who knows? They're Greeks.
I'm not going to get that. That's too much information. There we go.
But as to William Wallace, my understanding of William Wallace is that they did try to blot him out from history a little bit.
Yes.
So it might make sense that someone like William Wallace, like we don't have any of the letters or correspondence of William Wallace. I think everything is secondhand account from William Wallace, if I'm not mistaken. You might have to Google that, but I don't think we got anything original.
Yeah, so he's one of those figures. Yeah,
but when you try to blot a guy out from history, you tend to run into that kind of thing.
Yeah. There's not a lot of evidence that my grandpa exists, right?
Yeah, but we don't hinge all of our hopes
except your existence.
Kind of
except you are the evidence.
There's that.
You are here.
Yeah, I am here.
Okay.
But I mean, you know, the mythical grandpa, the one that everybody talks about. I mean, I don't have any. I mean, I remember when I was like 6 years old and being an old man who this dude would sit in his rocking chair, rock back and forth. He wore the linoleum out. He had a Serbian Bible that was the binding had fell off and it was all loose leaves. He would put his hand on it and he would recite that Bible in Serbian, right? And that's all I remember of him. And then he would moan. He go, and that's my whole memory of my grandpa. So I don't even really know if that dude is real. I could have made him up.
Could have made him up, yeah.
Could have made him up, yeah.
Could have made him up.
I had another question, and as I say, there was one more I came in for, which was okay. So God is all-knowing, all powerful, omnibenevolence. But
citation needed.
All-knowing is the one that I want to rely on here, because it appears Jesus was illiterate.
Yes.
Well,
now could you square the circle of being all-knowing and not knowing?
Yeah.
Well, we do have Jesus. We have stories of Jesus reading in public.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to say. Teaching in the synagogues. In one of the texts, he does say at a young age.
Yeah, he was up reading with the synagogues. He also read publicly in one of the synagogues too. So whether he was Jesus, you know, isn't portrayed as a character as illiterate. So
yeah,
he did know. So
right. Okay. Again, just another case of being careless, like Moses.
What's careless is God's treatment of this thing. Like he knows what the skepticism is going to be as an all-knowing God, but he doesn't seem to provide the evidence that would get rid of the skepticism. Like it seems like that's a big boo-boo on his part.
Yeah,
like an all-knowing God.
not just that either, right? He also seems to treat his own writing with complete disrespect as being the supreme being of the universe. He doesn't seem to care whether the original.
There's variance in the text, you know.
Dismisses it with a hand wave.
Let alone have Jesus write some stuff
differences
down.
of opinion, you know, like
right?
I
mean, he was a carpenter.
James and Paul have difference of opinion about works and grace, and so
he was a carpenter.
Deal with that.
He was a carpenter. He could have just etched some like script into some wood, at least,
correct,
to last a few hundred years, in order for people to write that down and go, "No, I got this from the wood of Jesus." I don't know if you're aware how much wood Jesus had, but I'm guessing it was quite a lot, being God.
Yeah. Simos, it could be argued that this was his way of saying, I am not my father. Okay. My father has that doctrine. I am not my father. Okay.
I'm not my father.
I don't know if you've seen Toast of London, but hello? Anybody know what Toast of London is?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. It's a character, really good character in a comedy. And he's over dramatic in everything he does, and he comes to his father's funeral that he hasn't seen for years, and he comes into the church and he just stands in the doorway with the sunlight behind him, like with a halo over his head almost, and goes, "Father!" and then proceeds to dominate and ruin the entire funeral.
There we go.
It's fantastic. If anybody hasn't seen Toast of London, I highly recommend it.
Oh, now I'm curious. I'm definitely curious.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah. So going a little bit meta here. Okay, the reason we're having this discussion today, I think, is because a lot of Christians want actual proof for their faith because they don't have enough faith to live, to have faith without proof, right? I just read an interesting thing by a guy named Todd C. Wood. He's an evolutionary biologist who believes in creationism, right? But he famously says that there is a ton of evidence for evolution. The theory works. It's a very good theory. I just choose not to believe it because I have faith, right? And he's a real honest Christian. But anyway, the historicity of these books, like I always try to, like somebody needs to do a really good video where you would, like at some point we had a Bible that was like bound together, right? And I don't know when the hell that was, because I'm an atheist and I've never been a believer. And then prior to that, there were like these individual letters and books that somebody put together. When the hell did that happen? And then what is the what do we have to back up the authorship and the historicity of each of these books? I mean, is there a really good timeline that somebody's laid out? Because like, and then the other thing, okay, if this is the word of God, and if you can imagine 10 years after Jesus died, or 40 years after Jesus died, we've got 100 separate manuscripts hauling over. I mean, who was in charge of saying these are the word of God and these other manuscripts aren't? I mean, how did all this shit come together is my meta question, sort of. And why is it so goddamn important to Christians today that they have absolute proof of historicity?
So I can tell you what makes them mad when I tell them that the Gospels are hearsay. Like it's all hearsay. And then that pisses them off, especially because I've had discussions with lawyers that are Christian about that. Like, would you submit this to court as testimonial evidence?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, it's hearsay.
Yeah.
It's like, and so that's the big problem. Like, we don't know where all these stories come from.
Right.
Like, if you're looking for specifics, you ain't gonna find them.
The question, Mike, as well. So,
what was the date and event?
Mike, let me just answer the question as well, because I just got another thing which I really want to bring up as a parallel thing, which is, of course, the answer to your question, right, is what pisses off most Protestants is the church fathers.
Correct.
Decided this stuff,
sure.
Right? So there's some early church fathers, Origen. I don't know. What's the guy from North Africa? Is that? I can't remember who the North African
Origin
guy was.
and Irenaeus would have been real early players in the game, and then later you get people like Eusebius, Tertullian. So the reason that I mentioned Eusebius specifically is because he has a whole list of books that he calls accepted books by the church fathers and not accepted books. So he's very influential on these books are good, these books aren't.
The point I want to make about the church fathers who created the Bible that the Protestants read is that that's what the Catholics rely on and call tradition, right? So they don't believe just because it's written in the Bible, they believe because of tradition.
Sure.
Right? That's very important to them, and because that shows the credibility of the Catholic Church that goes right back to the beginning. Okay, allegedly, it doesn't.
Allegedly,
I mean,
I tell people any claim you make about this, you have to use the word allegedly.
Yeah. I always say allegedly because I know it doesn't. I know that there's some Gnostic texts which predate the church fathers, but nonetheless. So that's why it's important. And when you tell Protestants this, of course, they deny that. A lot of evangelicals deny Catholicism as being even Christian. And yet they're reading a Bible which is compiled by
Catholics,
the church fathers, by Catholics. So, like, there's this. I mean, there's such a lot of diverse kind of opinion which just gets overlooked by the schism, for instance, the later schism, which acknowledges this point, and like even going into, I don't know, say the Medici popes, right? Which are it's in a really important foundational phase because it brings in humanism, right, into this discussion, as it were. So there's some major issues which someone like Luther, right, who directly goes back to his teaching, directly comes from the church fathers. Okay, so and the Protestants don't even know that their teachings are Catholic teachings.
Yeah. What if we'd had what if we'd had the internet back then? What if we had the internet? With Facebook,
there'd be no Christianity. I don't think there would be a Christianity.
I don't. No. The only way we could
crazier.
The only way we could have had the internet back then is if God did it. So that would, if they had internet back then, I think that would be proof of God.
I mean, if Jesus had been on TikTok and X, posting every night from the toilet, it would have been interesting.
Yeah. So let me say two things about what y'all have been talking about here for a moment. that what we now like, what the canonical of the Hebrew, one of the main reasons that the Orthodox Church didn't accept like the Book of Enoch, which one of the Orthodox groups, Christian groups, it starts with the E, I can't remember what it's called, but they actually accept the Book of Enoch as canonical, like that, because it is the account of the fallen angels and this, that, and the other, though they called them watchers and had different terms for them. But they accept that as canonical, whereas the Orthodox Church ultimately did not accept it as canonical. So to say that, like, how did we get the canon? There's not a complete universal consensus even now of what is canonical, because Enoch is accepted by some and some don't. But the primary reason that like Eusebius and other people inside the Orthodox Church didn't want to accept Enoch is because it's a pre-BC text, right? But it was later Jewish, and it was the Jews never officially accepted it as canon. So they never accepted it in their canon. So the Orthodoxy didn't accept it in their canon, although it was mentioned in two different texts. And Jude actually quoted from it directly and mentioned Enoch. So we have verses in the Bible that cite from a book that is not accepted in the majority of
and Daniel only gets in the canon because it got under the wire of the Jewish acceptance. Like they accepted it right before Christianity started. And so they included Daniel, but they didn't include the Book of Enoch just because of that.
Yeah, and Revelation was on the chopping block twice, as we talked about.
Oh, many times.
Revelations barely made it. Like, Eusebius had it on his shit list of don't put that one in there.
I mean, that's one of the ironies, because of course Peter wasn't accepted, right? Although it should have been accepted, right?
Well, it wasn't really Peter's though.
Well,
it's not really Peter. They were yelling about that back then.
I'm not
really
even,
Peter or not.
I don't think any of them are. Who they claim to be anyway. But I'm just saying, the Gospel of Peter, right, was hotly contested and almost.
I don't know why it didn't make in. It had a talking cross and everything. That's a great character. Come on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's no more. Jesus. I mean, talking snakes, talking donkeys made it in.
Talking crosses. What?
Talking cross. What? The fuck, these guys just nuts.
What's so weird to me though, Simos, is people now that are Christian, because that is not canonical, they're like, that's crazy, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But if that would have been accepted by the early church fathers as canonical, they'd 100% be defending the talking cross. 100%.
Of course, yeah. And like, again, I mean, I don't think any of the Gospels are written by the people they say they are, but if they had accepted it, they would be saying that is an eyewitness account.
Right.
100%. 100% they'd be saying that's eyewitness.
So I just want to make a caveat on something, because a lot of these books that they call pseudepigraphical, they're pseudepigraphical because they claim the title of a person that we don't believe that they are. The reason that none of the Gospels are considered pseudepigraphical texts is because literally none of the four Gospels say that they are written by those people. They don't say it anywhere in the text. Because later, people attributed it to being written by them, but they never claimed that they were. So we don't categorize them as pseudepigraphic because they didn't say, "Hey, I'm Matthew, I'm Mark." They didn't say that crap.
Don't even get that.
Right. And in Matthew, we actually get the book of Matthew. It talks about Matthew in the third person. It says that he came and that he saw the tax collector Matthew, like he's writing about this other guy, and they call this Matthew. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? This is clearly not Matthew.
Seems like if it was actually the person writing it, he would say, "Well, that's when
he met me." Right, exactly.
But he doesn't talk that way. He talks in the third person about himself. Like, come on, man.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so like I think it's, again, the reason I brought up the church fathers is because if they're the ones that put the text together, but they also put the theology together.
Correct.
Right? Well, in the case of Tertullian, it's the Trinity. Right? Yeah. I mean, he's the guy that said, "Oh yeah, here we go, 3 in 1, and that solves this problem of people saying that we're pagans." Right?
How about the Old Testament? So that was put together prior to Jesus, or was it?
Yeah. It's like 600 BC, I would say, around that time frame.
I don't know.
And they had it bound as
Daniel was maybe later. Daniel was definitely later, but Like the early history that's put together is very much like 600 to 500 BCE. It's
you have the Torah.
Go ahead. Yeah, the Torah is probably the oldest.
Yes,
other
the Torah
than Job.
is definitely
What
no.
I thought Job's is Job later.
We talk about this. It's 600 or something. I think is where they're dating it. But anyway, but yeah,
maybe as a passed down through word of mouth. But it certainly they don't have any documents that old.
No.
Well, it doesn't have any. Job is so weird because it doesn't have any pertinence. Like we've had a lot of apologetics will say that everything about in the story is leaning towards like the salvation of Israel, right? And that it's about that. But when you look at the book of Job, like its pertinence to the storyline, like it's Esther, we kind of have a similar problem, but at least it hints at it a little bit. Yeah. But Job is like, no, this whole thing, it's nothing to do with the main story, like of salvation of the group of Israel, or it seems to be very isolated. We don't even know where's the story even taking place. It seems
like an old oral tradition that they decided just to throw in because it was old.
I think it justifies like the patriarchy, right, or the patriarchal nature of the religion, right? Because clearly it's Job's for the boys.
So they didn't have a printing press, so there obviously wasn't Bibles
all
that they were carrying around.
So
what were they carrying around? Just a whole bunch of scrolls?
Scrolls. They were carrying around. They were keeping them in like a special place.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they load them up on the donkey and take off and go from one church to another?
No.
But I mean, can you imagine one of the scrolls falling off the donkey?
Absolutely.
And it's like, boom,
yeah.
boom.
Probably would have killed anything it fell on. I can tell you that right now.
So all that existed prior to Jesus. So there was an accepted Old Testament canon, basically. Okay. And then when did the same thing happen for the New Testament? When did it all come together as a bunch of
series of councils? It's a series of councils.
It is a series of councils that accepted it, because there's a lot of literature. But I wanted to mention something about the Old Testament, Isaiah specifically. If you ever hear a scholar mention like second Isaiah or third Isaiah, there's no such thing in the Bible. Like it's all the book of Isaiah. But we now know that these are different prophets that are being called Isaiah, that they have a prophet, something that they've prophesied of, and they've kind of pushed them all together as Isaiah. But these are different people who are prophesying, and some of them we don't know their name of. So when you hear a scholar say the third Isaiah, they're talking about chapter 53, I think, forward, that this is a different prophet that is saying these things are going to happen. Yeah, so you have a lot of compilement and compilations that kind of go on, even in the Old Testament.
Editing, very edited. The Old Testament is incredibly edited, more than they want to admit.
So what do we know about Genesis? The Genesis of Genesis. How did that end up in the
combination of Babylonian myths, a little Zoroastrianism thrown in?
So Genesis 2 predates Genesis 1 is what we know. Genesis
really?
Yes, Genesis.
There's two different documents.
2. Right. We believe they're from two different
documents. This is a JPD theory, like the different Jehovah, Elohim.
Right. It's called the documentary hypothesis that kind of puts, and you can Google it by all means, the documentary hypothesis, but it puts Genesis chapter 2, that it might be the oldest. It's kind of the beginning of our oldest story starts there. And then later, was that the Yahwist or the Priestly? I can't remember which one's older.
Yeah, I think it's the Priestly one that adds like chapter 1. Like it's there. I can't remember it specifically. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a tradition for chapter 1 and there's a tradition for chapter 2 and 3. Yeah. And chapter 2 and 3 is probably the most closely associated with Babylonian mythology. Like it's very, very similar story to another story in Babylonian mythology. So it's like they're borrowing from that. They're throwing in their Zoroastrian.
The 7-day account comes from the Babylonians.
That little sucker Genesis is causing a lot of problems for me as an evolutionary biologist.
Creationists cling to that like it's their salvation lifeline.
It's like it has to do that whole original sin thing in the fall.
For Ham, that's a big thing. Like he openly says, if Genesis 1 through 11 isn't true, through, then the whole thing collapses. Like that's his thing. You got to throw it all out.
That's why I was so amused to read that Todd C. Wood today when he said basically I have all this evidence that evolution happened and common origin happened and all that, but I choose not to believe it because I have faith. Period. And that's it.
Yeah,
and shut it down. Huh?
But I mean, you know, in some way you got to hand it to him that he has faith in something that he's not going to, that he doesn't have to totally understand in his mind. He just has to have faith, right? So he's like a pure Christian without an axe to grind. And I kind of like those people. I like those people. Yeah.
He's at least honest about it. He's like saying, yeah, the evidence is there, but I just don't buy it because I have this belief system. Right. That is a most honest statement you'll get out of a person like that. Like,
and I think it's a
very honest statement.
It's the most faithful.
It may be honest, but it shows that he's mad as a hatter.
Yes, no, I don't know.
Oh no, I do know.
Well, it's kind of like I don't know.
I tried that on my wife once. It didn't work. Let me just say that.
Okay. It didn't work.
I kind of.
It didn't work. It did work.
I know the universe is here, Simos, but I don't know how it got
here.
Her.
I don't even believe she exists. I don't know what you're getting worried about. She doesn't exist. I have faith she doesn't exist. I know you've got some evidence, right? You found some knickers in the bed, but no.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
My second wife doesn't exist, but she keeps calling me.
Yeah, exactly.
You choose not to accept that's real, though. So
exactly.
Problem solved.
Problem
solved.
Oh my goodness! But like I don't know. This is
so my understanding is like how we got to the Greek is that there's 75 scholars were pulled, and I don't remember the king that first wanted to do it to get from the Jewish tradition over to the to Rome, but they wanted that there were a king that was really big on literature, and they were building library and stuff, and they wanted the Jewish tradition in Greek. So they got a hold of, and my understanding it was 75
that's why it's
Jewish right. That's where the name comes from. Yep. So 75 of these Jewish guys that they get to translate it all over into the Greek. And they translate it over into the Greek, and then we wind up losing the original, or what we had of the Hebrew writings, and all we really had were the Greek writings for a while until we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, which then we had found something that was older than the Septuagint. But for the longest time, like that was the source, that we didn't have any of the older Jewish text anymore. So when we got the New Testament writers, to the best we can tell, every New Testament writer, when they're reading the Old Testament, they're reading it from the Greek. Yeah. They're reading it from the Septuagint, not from the original Hebrew. And this is why we wind up getting the problem with the virgin birth proposition, because the original Hebrew, and now we've confirmed it with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the original word was a word that could have meant a young woman, but they translated it as, that it was a virgin, because the word that the Septuagint used for the Hebrew, when they put their Greek word in there, it was vergio or whatever, that was a virgin. So then they're like, oh yes, she has to be born of a right. But the original Hebrew,
interpretation in the translation.
Yeah, the original Hebrew, like it's just a young woman, so they didn't need to have a virgin birth.
And that happens far, far more than you think.
It's also worth remembering that there is the Greek idea of virgin birth through God's. It's not common, but it was known, right? So the theology is there. The ideas, the philosophical ideas that come through the Bible are all Greek, right? Alexander the Great rode through there in whatever, I don't know, 330 or 330, something like that. So it was Greek owned. Right, for 300 years before the Romans got there, at least, and maybe 500 years before the Septuagint was written. Right. Funnily enough, that job was done, of course, at the Library of Alexandria. Right, that's where it was originally. They got these alleged Greek Hebrew scholars to come in and write in Greek, which obviously everybody would have known. Right. So did they really? Was there no Was there no Torah written in Greek before that? I find that very hard to believe.
This
in
is
500 years. I just find that very difficult to believe.
This whole Christian thing is sounding pretty weak to me right now. Now that I listen,
oh, it's pretty weak, Mike.
Pretty weak, is it? You're giving it too much credit.
Okay, this might be controversial, but should we let Christians vote?
Oh dear. You know, speaking of Christians voting, I saw a great meme of a picture of the Jesus rising from the dead, and somebody had put Trump's face on it and said the new pilots for AA lines or something like that. You know.
Oh my gosh!
Well, Trump does that himself. You know.
Yeah,
you've seen his recent.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Oh, that was brilliant. Yeah, and he was like he was healing Jon Stewart. You know, healing his mental illness. Right?
Why hasn't he gone to Jordan Peterson and raised him up? I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, Jordan needs healing. I understand right now.
Yeah, he's very sick. Yeah.
I thought that was a brilliant meme that somebody did though.
So, Robert, do you have anybody in the back room that would be better qualified to be here than me?
No, there's no one in the back
okay.
room.
Okay, I'll stick around.
But Mike, let's sure it up. You're going to be on next Saturday?
Sunday.
Oh, yes. Sunday. That's right. Next Sunday.
Yeah. What time? 3? 3 is when you.
Yep, 3 to 5. I run them Central Standard Time. So I kind of held off on that. I wanted to get some other people that I want to get Alicia in here. We got a guy named Willow that runs a robot channel, and I'm trying to get Hizzle in here, but we're going to get somebody scheduled. I kind of wanted to leave this one open because I wanted to give you another shot on it to get back in here when your mic and all got fixed. But
yeah, I want to talk about this whole naturalization of epistemology project, and morality is one of the things that we can talk about. Basically, the naturalization of ethics and morality and all that.
Yeah,
but
there's almost the philosophy bros. There's the evolution bros, and then there's the Bible bros. And I hate to say I'm not so much with the evolutionary bros. I try to a little, but I started coming more into the philosophy side. But I've spent so much time already. You know, I already had so much time invested in the Bible side that it's hard for me to get away with. I still read older church fathers and stuff to this day. I still read it.
Yeah, I don't know beans about Christianity really, other than what you run into on the street. Lifelong atheist.
I've lived that life for a long time before I got out. So
yeah.
I know the Christian world very, very well.
Well, that would be. I would love to have had that experience. The closest I had is me and my friend Mac. When we became Buddhists, we decided for one summer to become Catholics and believe in it. So we elected to believe in God for a whole summer, right? And we read the Bible and we read all kinds of Catholic bullshit. And we would walk around. And one time we were walking out. It was right before a thunderstorm, and it was about 2:00 in the morning. We were miles from home on an old country road, and we saw this cloud. It was like, and we called him Big Dad, God. And we had this like semi, spiritual experience. We go, oh my God, it's Big Dad, and throwing lightning bolts at us. But we actually did immerse ourselves into the belief, because one of the ideas of Buddhism is that you can don a belief like a loose fitting coat, and then decide to cast it off whenever you're ready, right? And that's what we did for a whole summer. And that was right after I'd had that spiritual experience. So. But it would have been great to have been immersed in a belief like that and then let it go and understand it, because I've had all kinds of bizarre psychological experiences in my life, nervous breakdowns, been in psych wards, all that crap. And I've had real hallucinations where you can hear people talking in the static of the stereo. And I value all of those experiences. I wish I had been a believer at one point, so I had that experience to draw from, but I unfortunately never was.
Well, let me just tell you now, with the predisposition of and finding patterns in the aggregate and things like that, you might not wish so much that was the case, because unlike those positions, Christianity has a hook in it that is very much unparalleled, that is very difficult. Not just guilt, but a sense of salvation and a sense of calm, and like the world makes sense through this lens, pain, suffering, everything, that I have this great savior. So a lot of these ideals they're super, super comforting, especially in the light of losing loved ones. And now I have some place that all my loved ones is gone. That's super, super comforting. And I'll give you a primary example.
It's a sales pitch. I've
lost a child, and people who have lost, people who have lost someone, they have this ideal that they got them in heaven. So when you to come away from it is like to now accept that your loved ones aren't in this great place, and all these other. So there's a lot. There's so many hooks they have in
like
it.
Losing a limb. Yeah.
Right. It's really, really tough to come away from.
Pretty good. That's a good analogy. Like when I left the faith after 40 years, there was a lot of emotional things that I had to process, and I had to go to therapy about that. And so glad for the therapist that I had. But there's a lot of, like, I talk about this on my channel all the time, of the process of deconverting and getting out of it. And it's harder for some religions than others. And it depends on how long you've been in it too. Like the longer you're in it, the more difficult it is to get out. And it's a tough process. It's kind of why I run my channel a lot in my community, is to help people through that. Like they're more than welcome to come by and ask me questions because of that.
I think a requirement should be that everybody that deconverts has to read Beyond Theology by Ellen Watts.
Yeah.
As they come out. I don't know. Have you read it? Has anybody?
I haven't read it.
I haven't.
I've thought about writing. I've heard about it, and I've thought about writing something similar myself, because I think
it's unbelievable. Beyond Theology is unbelievable. He talks about Christianity as being this elective belief, and that's of course where me and my friend Mac got the idea of becoming Christians. But it's really interesting. He talks about the game of Christianity and how fucking serious it is.
Yes, it is a very serious game. I can talk about that all day long, man. It's a system.
Let me just point out this all cappers Christian that we have coming in here. All captors. If you want the truth, this guy's got it. If y'all want,
are you selling something? Are you selling?
He is Elijah. Oh, he's Elijah.
Oh, damn.
Selling a supplement.
Could I say a couple of things on the last subject? Okay. Firstly, Mike, I've put a link in the side chat for something you may want to look at not in the side chat, in the private chat there for you. It's something that might interest you, a natural epistemology called evolutionary epistemology.
It's called private chat. It's a little tab.
It's in the private chat,
Yeah.
So you might like to have a quick look at that. When you were posting your stuff to me, that's what I first thought of. And so I did a bit of research into it, and I thought, actually, there's something here.
Okay. I'm sure it's Simos approved, so I know what to expect. So
well,
but I can't find private chat on this fucking restream.
Okay, you have to go down to the left.
There it is on the left.
Yeah.
Well, you see, I don't.
Just have a look at it. Have a look at it. I don't want to talk about it right now because it's far too complex. The second point I want to make is I think people that deconvert, right, like your good self. Now, I've never deconverted. I never believed, so I feel very fortunate in that respect, because I had to deal with life's problems from a position of not having this huge crutch, which I could just hide behind. And I think that is something which is more difficult at the time that you're doing it, especially, but because you do it much younger, right? I.e. pre-puberty and post-puberty, really. When I have to deal with the themes of death and grief, I don't have that. Oh well, I'll meet them again. Excuse, right, or whatever. So you have to come to terms with, no, they are really gone. That's it. Yeah. And that leads directly into nihilism and thoughts of
that's
your
probably
own.
What you're talking about is one of the big parts of my deconversion story, is actually coming to terms with my father's death. Like, before, I had this mythology that I was going to see him again. And then one day after my leaving the faith, I'm standing at his graveside, and I literally finally broke down and cried about it. Like, it delayed my grief response in a very unhealthy way. And And it's that kind of thing. And like, I'm never going to see him again. And he was a great father. I have great memories, but I'm never going to see him again. And when you finally come to terms with that, that's when grief really starts to resolve itself. And this is what this does. Yeah.
It can still take many years, depending on
it does. Yeah, but I was blocked up and stopped because of my religion. So.
And so the second thing I just wanted to say about that is that leads on then, right, to your own mortality. And then understanding, well, you're not going to exist, right? And that's also extremely difficult to accept as somebody who, you know, as children do, think they're immortal. They've got no concept of this idea of death, right? And so to deal with that, as I call it, nihilism, is also very tricky. However, there are plenty of secular resources, and I would just like to recommend my personal favorite, which is Ozzy Osbourne's solo albums. Right? If you read those lyrics, right, you will understand why nihilism means absolutely fucking nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. And it can get you through it. It personally, it genuinely got me through it.
As an Ozzy fan, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
that's good.
Especially Diary of a Madman, right? That's the one.
Absolutely.
One alternative is go fucking mad. The other alternative is to try and live life the best you can.
Yeah.
Those are the two options.
I've been on a real personal journey with grief for about 5.5 years now, along with my own mortality. You know, I'm 75. And I mean, I could drop dead at any fucking moment, right, of a stroke or an aneurysm. And it is amazing what you can do with the secular view of death and, you know, life, death, birth, all of that stuff. I think it's so much more beautiful than
it is more
what the Christians bring. And besides, like if I died and my mom was there and I got to see my mom after all these years, and I had to fucking explain myself to her for the last 15 years. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be able to explain all of it.
I have an analogy which I've used for many, many years now, but I use this to explain to modern Christians why their idea that you know, as an atheist, life isn't meaningless, and that's simply this, right? I use the analogy of a painting. Right, and life is a painting, okay? And as I go through my life, I continue to add to this painting, right? But I'm not a Christian, right? And the Christian analogy of it is painting by numbers. Now, I can go through my life, right, and get to the end and have filled in all the numbers, okay? And sure, I've got a great looking painting, right?
It's not yours.
Is it? Yeah. Is it as much?
It's bullshit.
No, for me personally. No, well, it's not bullshit. It's still a painting, right? You still did well. Well done. You managed to keep things between the
lines. Congratulations.
But and that's still a painting, and it's a beautiful looking painting. Maybe probably better than the painting I can do myself because I'm a shit painter. But that's besides the point, right? The point is I can look at my painting and go, I did all of that. Yeah. All of the creativity, the shapes, the themes, the ideas, everything about it, I painted. I didn't have to fill in any lines. I didn't have to look up what number is the color, right? No, it's all me. And it's going to look fucking weird. I agree. To anybody else that doesn't understand it, it'll look weird. But then there's no afterlife, so I'm the only one that has to understand it. And if I can look at that painting as I'm dying and go, yeah, I did that, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Then I've lived a life worth living.
And at 75, it is occurring to me more and more the immensity of my life. Like when I start like I've been digging up memory after memory after memory and the immensity of my life. And it's like, if it were to go on too much longer, I think it would be too much.
I feel that.
I mean, 75 years is an immense fucking life, and all of the situations and parties, all of the days I've had. And then the other thing you take from this meaning thing, we can talk about that next week a little bit. This idea of, how do you grow in meaning? That sort of thing is, it's like every breath you draw right now. I mean, you think about, like, we'll get sentimental about memories of our youth. You remember running through the fields and playing and all that stuff. And back when you were doing that, you weren't even fucking paying attention hardly. you pay attention now when you remember things. And the takeaway from that is right here, right now, fucking pay attention, because this is life. This is it unfolding, and it's just wonderful. But I think the secular view of life is so much richer and more wonderful. That
definitely makes you take your life more seriously. Like, definitely makes you pay attention to it.
And at the same time, less seriously. You can kind of laugh the whole fucking.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like if I go out and I get hit by a bus, right before that bus hits me, I'm gonna be laughing my ass off. I mean, really, it's funny as shit.
What a way to finish it, you know what I mean?
Oh, that would
be a way to go. Outstanding.
Y'all, we're gonna go ahead and do some closing statements on here, and I'm gonna pull y'all down off the stage as we do the closing statements. And Ed, we're gonna keep you on till last here. Mike is fixing to be on next Saturday. I think we're gonna try to retackle the subject that we had. You'll have the video link will be up, I think, in an hour or so. I'll probably go ahead and put it up.
You mean Sunday?
Yes. Next Sunday. I'm sorry. I used to do Saturdays and I moved them to Sundays and I've forgot. But next Sunday. So we'll have Mike on. Mike, I did put your link in the description. It should have been in there from Answers in Atheism. Yep. And any last words or any projects, anything you got going on presently?
Me and Scott keep threatening to do streams, but we've been pretty lazy. But I want to do some work on Rebecca and evolution in general. And then for you, I have this project of naturalizing epistemology, and I take it very seriously. And I'm an amateur philosopher, and nobody takes me seriously. Someday, somebody will take me seriously, hopefully, and maybe next week is the week. But
you look like Socrates. Just wear the robe, and I think everyone will take you seriously.
I got to get a robe.
I do have to get a robe. Get a robe.
Socrates or Jesus. I'm not sure which at the moment.
Okay.
Appreciate it, Mike. Hang tight, and we'll chat in a few minutes if you'd like. But I'm gonna pull you off here.
Yeah.
Simos, my bad. Simos, last words. What's up?
Yeah, I mean, fascinating discussion, always is, I think, and
it was.
I think also, I think we've ended in a really nice way, which is to promote secularism as being something worth living, and that's because I think because we all have this philosophical bent, and that's why we understand it, right? I think somebody great once said, philosophy is just the question. It's just the question of looking as to what is a life worth living.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the highest praise. So when people are down on philosophy, I think they just don't understand that they're sad. That's all it is. And the reason I'm a cheerful person, even in the face of it all, is because I have philosophy as a background to be able to say, look, things may be like this or like that, but there's always a different perspective that I can take to look at it. And that's the great thing about being secular and not having to rely on a religion. You don't have a worldview which is in any particular way skewed from a perspective which must be obeyed. And I think that that's a wonderful thing. Thank you very much for having us on.
Thank you for coming on. I did put your link in there. If you want to put it in there in the chat again, you're more than welcome to. Y'all check out Simos. Simos is about to hit 500 here. He's trying to get to that big mark there. So y'all help him out and give him a sub. We appreciate it. Thanks, Simos. We'll catch you next time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Ed, I think it was a pretty good show. I enjoyed the conversation.
I enjoyed this. This was a great conversation. I think that's kind of the point, is to have the conversation so other people start having the conversation. So it's good. It's a good thing.
What you got going on with your life? What you doing? Which projects?
Well, I'm running the Rabid Atheist show from Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern for about an hour and a half every day. Different themes depending on the day. Sometimes it's an open stream. Sometimes I'm talking the Bible, do a Bible study on Wednesday that's open. And Thursday is Deconversion Hangout, where I talk deconversion to people who need help. I'm always open to that. My whole purpose since I started YouTubing was to normalize the deconversion process, that this is a normal thing that people go through and you shouldn't decry it, and normalize atheism too, like secularism, because it's like there's so much misinformation about what an atheist is and things like that, and countering that. And
you've built a great community over there.
It's a great community. We have a lot of fun. Of course, we have our made-up deity fangs and all the stuff that goes along with that. And all of that is just illustrating of the absurdity of things that we left. You know, it's kind of a satire, running satire, but also we have some pretty good serious discussions from time to time about life, the universe, and everything. So it's been a wild ride for me, but I'm enjoying it, and going regular 5 days a week has been pretty good for me. And of course, I come out here and talk on shows like yours because I remember what it's like to be small. I really do.
Yeah. Okay, and I've really just started right at the end of last year, so I haven't done a ton of streams. My video count's fairly low, but I mean, I've been happy with the progression. I don't spend a lot of time with it.
Enjoy the ride. You can get really anxious about it, but enjoy the ride. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm.
Thanks for coming on. I always enjoy the chat. It's good talking to you. And y'all check out Ed, the Rabid Atheist. Link is in the video description, and we'll put another link up there. But I appreciate it, Ed. And if you hang tight, we'll chat for a minute after. All right.
Sure.
Appreciate it, man. All right. Well, that's been a great show. I enjoyed the conversation. The subject is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. There's a few people that are in chat that I wanted to mention also. The Mighty Filbert, I believe he has a show tonight. Y'all should check him out. He's definitely a guy worth watching. Over at Dave's Captive Desk, they do a show every Saturday, and that's kind of a little bit of a Saturday hangout where they check out a few videos from theists that might have a little bit of wonky doctrine, and they just try to be a little critical and evaluate their videos. But it's definitely a channel worth checking out also. But as always, I appreciate everyone who has stopped in and joined us today, and I encourage you to remember